Hello, back again. My name is Abby Sherlock, and I am one of your co hosts here for Area of Effect. And this is our community panel. Reminder that we are still taking donations for our cause this weekend, Gamers Outreach. Be sure to check out our link on Tiltify. So, our guests today come from a wide range of backgrounds in community management and a multiple of companies within the gaming industry. From current and past work at top AAA studios across the world, we're talking epic entries on their resume like Bungie and Amazon Games. We are sitting in the presence of some pretty knockout community specialists and managers. So we're going to level up and get this thing started. So, talking about how kind of this works operation wise, we have some questions on deck for these awesome panelists, but we also are here for this audience participation. So that means you could ask your questions for our Q&A session later to be answered at the end of the panel by typing command question and Twitch chat, which will bring up a form for you to submit your questions. Those in Discord can be on the lookout for this form and panel announcements. Now, so to get started, we're going to go kind of in a line like we've been doing today, and I will direct the question to you. But can each of you give me a brief summary of who you are, what company you work for now, and how you work in community? Roxanne.
Oh no, I
Yes.
have to start. I hello. My name's Roxanne. I'm currently a community manager at Amazon Games. I have kind of a history of working as a CM in the MMORPG space. I
Yeah.
was on EverQuest for a very long time, and I recently kind of had a stint in Indies at the Behemoth, creators of Castle Crashers. So I've been kind of all over the range, managing communities, small and large. And right now, what I do is I am a product community manager, which means I kind of facilitate and orchestrate
Mm.
not only community management, but all of our kind of direct communications that we do with our players. Like I help out our editorial folks, our social media folks, kind of make sure everyone's in line there. So that's what I do.
Love it. Leah.
Hi, I'm a player support specialist at Bungie. My name's Leah. Kind of what I do on a day-to-day basis is I work with our other player support specialists and our community moderators to answer questions on the forums, answer support tickets, field questions from community, and create content to better outline kind of trouble spots that our players may have and how to get them through that.
Cool. Annie.
Hello, everyone. My name's Annie. I am a community manager for Age of Empires 4 at Relic Entertainment. This is my first time kind of being a community manager, but it's been really interesting. So I focus on a lot of the content for Beats and planning for our upcoming launch next month, which is super exciting.
Let's go. And Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a community manager at Discord. I work with all of Discord's various communities. We like to say it's a community of communities. And yeah, I work with partners, Verified, and Hype Squad, and just all sorts of really cool people that use our app.
That is cool. So we're going to kick this off with a very sweet question. I think it's going to let our audience get to know you more on an individual level. What gaming community has impacted you the most personally? I think this kind of tells us a bit about your history too. So Emily.
Yes. I would say probably the Final Fantasy 14 gaming community has
Oh,
impacted me the most.
ah,
They are like the coolest from like the community managers to the community itself. They are like the coolest and most wonderful group of people. They're so nice. Like you're hard pressed to find somebody who plays that game that isn't just like a really genuinely cool human being. So,
ah,
yeah.
I love that. Annie.
I guess my answer isn't really in gaming specifically, but the most impactful one's definitely been my school community. When I was in school, it was like the first time that I truly felt like I had a place. I participated in like a ton of extracurricular activities, got in touch with a lot of issues that affected my college, and that's when I started getting out more and getting more confidence. So impact wise, that's definitely where I started, and yeah, kind of found my way into gaming from there.
Leah.
Yeah, so for me, I would say the Seattle University Esports and Gaming Club. I got my start at the collegiate level and I helped co-found that club, and working with that community and helping foster that growth on campus was like my like decision. Like that was when I knew that I wanted to get into the gaming community space. And so for me, like that group is like where I got my start and like holds a very special place in my heart for me.
That Roxanne.
So mine is a community I actually used to work with. I used to be a CM for the PlanetSide 2 community, and they're a very passionate group of players with like all sorts of backgrounds, but a lot of them are like a large majority of that community is like hardcore gamer guys. So when I was working on that game, I kind of came across this treasure trove. That's a word of of old lore that had never been published for the game. And one of my hobbies, like outside of work, is writing. So I kind of took it
Mm.
on as a passion project, and I was like, hey, I want to like it's very old and outdated. So I was like, I want to rewrite this. I want to give our players lore. This is just something I want to do. And that community was so supportive of me taking that on. And like, even though it wasn't my main job and they knew this and there were other things sometimes they like wanted me to do, they were so excited and just so grateful that I was doing that for them. So it was super validating for me to have something I was passionate about, like a side project for me, validated by that community. So I will always be grateful for that.
We love that. This next question has a bit to do with, I think, public perspective of what a community manager is, and it's the question is, what are some duties that you do that people don't think community managers have to do? Roxanne.
I think there's a lot. I think when people usually think like community manager, their thoughts either go to, okay, you're the one tweeting, you're the one on the forums, or you're the one with the band hammer. um, that seems to be the most broad conception that I've seen. But there's a whole lot. Like I said earlier, I've been at smaller companies and larger companies. Right now, I mentioned I'm a product community, which means again I'm kind of the one people come to. I'm kind of the game expert and specialist. I double check everything. I make sure everyone has everything in line, knows the right details of the game, gives community input to things like social, editorial, marketing assets, whatever, kind of just managing at a broader scale. Something else, even that this is obviously a little less typical, but when I was at the Behemoth, we were very small. I actually helped do user research and kind of
Mm.
helped break apart some of that feedback just because I had that unique community perspective. So really, community managers get their hands on, anything and everything. Uh, Main thing is, I think, being a game and community expert, being a voice for those players, and like bringing it into all sorts of disciplines of the industry and those sorts of jobs. So you're always there to represent.
Yeah. Leah.
Yeah, I would definitely echo Roxanne's sentiment. Especially in my job, we do a lot of copywriting. So
Mm.
we write a ton of Hop articles. We write a weekly section in the This Week at Bungie. We do a lot of in-game server clients and Twitter tweets. Something else that we also do is a lot of bug logging and a lot of playtesting, just so we can get our hands on the content and have an understanding of what that player experience is going to be once players get into game. Um, but yes, I would definitely say that like talking on the forums and tweeting and the ban hammer is something that like players definitely think that we mostly do, which I am on the forums a lot, but there's a lot that happens behind the scenes as well.
Annie.
Yeah, I'm gonna also echo everyone. I think like that's the main question, right? It's like, what does a community manager actually do? And like that title means something so different across so many studios. Like Roxanne said, when you work in a smaller studio or a big studio, it varies, right? I've spoken to CMs that do everything marketing related. Like they define the messaging of the game, they create the assets, they run the events, they manage influencers, and maybe some other community managers focus on a special skill, like maybe they are the specific copywriter, community manager for the team. Like rather than the duties that maybe the community, like people aren't aware of what community managers do, I think a lot of folks aren't aware of how much they do. Like they juggle so many stakeholders, the community obviously being the main one. And I saw a tweet the other day that said, community managers have the soft skills of a producer, and I wholeheartedly believe that maybe that's not what the community is aware, that CMs really just do everything. like there's just a lot on them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Emily,
Yes. I think like we also, at least in my experience, I've dealt with everything from legal to like crisis
Mhm.
comms to I think Annie put it great when we say that we have like a ton of stakeholders.
Yeah,
There, I've been hard pressed to find people in like an organization that a community manager doesn't talk to, at least on like a weekly basis. Like we touch on everything from how, a product or a game is perceived to like the day-to-day like issues with it. So I would say we do a lot of things externally, but we also do a lot of things internally to make sure that like teams across, either our studio or our company are connected and know what people are saying.
no, I love that. And this is really interesting because I think all of these amazing people here have such great backgrounds at so many different kinds of games, startups, AAA, established, big games, small games. So, what strategies have worked across the board you've seen in your multiple roles? And what have you had to do differently depending on the product? Emily.
Yes. One thing that's worked for me across like different things is transparency, honestly. I have said that, as much as possible, we try to be transparent with the community, even if the news isn't always the best news. Sometimes it's just good to let people know where things stand and help them understand, like, what are the factors behind, good or bad news. And just communicating openly and honestly with your community is just a huge trust factor between you as a CM and them as a community and their like perception of, the company or the game or the product.
Yeah,
Um, One thing that I have had to do differently in the past is just like know who you're talking to and know how to talk at their level. Um, there are people that are going to have like a really intense like passion for what you're working on, and there are people that are going to be brand new. So it's good to like come up with ways to talk to both kinds of community members and make them feel welcome.
love that. Annie.
Yeah, I'm gonna go off a little bit of what Emily said, and like the biggest thing is respect. And I know it's like, how is respect a strategy? But it kind of has to do with like what you're communicating and when and who you're communicating it to. And going back to what I said earlier about community managers actually doing a lot, it's also, community managers have to do a lot of audience defining as well. Just like Emily said, there are so many different kinds of people in this one community that we're talking to. It could be like 7 different types of personas or something in one game community or in one community that you're managing. And it always comes down to like, if your strategy is around creating a community or are you coming into one, or you could be doing both in one community, and they all require like a slightly different sort of way of approaching it. But when you come back to the respectful strategy, the transparent strategy, it's always deciding like, what do you say, when do you say it, and how do you say it. And I think that goes across any kind of community that you're managing.
100%. Leah.
Yeah, definitely agreeing with what Emily and Annie have said. I also think that like consistency in
Ooh.
communication is
Mhm.
also super important. If like especially when if your community has that kind of expectation that like you are willing to be like very open and transparent with their communication, making sure that like they are getting updates as necessary is very important. I do think that like scope or size of the community can definitely change strategy. For me, at the collegiate level, like one-to-one or like much smaller community interactions were much more feasible for me. I'm like very much outnumbered by our player base at this point. Um, but that just means that you have to think differently about like how wide your communication is and like what kind of interactions that you have.
Totally. Roxanne.
I think kind of part of being transparency and like what everyone else was talking about was also like allowing yourself to be human and not just like a representative of a brand. I've always had better interactions, better outcomes when, I kind of, I don't want to say point out, but I'm like, hey, I'm just a person. Like just the other day, I mistyped dates for a beta we have coming up,
Mm.
and people were like, oh my gosh, is it longer now? And I was like, this is just me. I edited it and I was like, hey, I have a wedding to go to on the day I just typed. Like, that's why it was stuck in my head. Like,
Yeah.
I'm really sorry. But I think because I was like, hey, like, I haven't been sleeping enough. This is why this date was in my head. People are
Yeah.
like, okay, that's a bummer, but okay. Instead of just being like, edit it. Oh, nope, sorry, that didn't happen. Like, whatever, just owning it and being like, hey, I'm a person, it happens. There was a lot more positive responses I got. People were a lot less upset about it than they maybe could have been, and that was a mistake on me, so I wouldn't have blamed them.
Well, I think you did a perfect segue to our next point, Roxanne, because it's talking about how do you manage your own mental health on top of caring for others, right? So that boundary making and how now with digital media, that boundary can sometimes erode. So I think any tips or tricks to the trade that you have learned? And let's go with Roxanne.
Yeah, setting those boundaries is extremely important, I would say, like more than anything, especially if you're someone that has like public social media. I know I do. But just, reiterating, a lot of people will back you up, some will not, but being like, hey, I'm not going to respond on weekends. It's 1 a.m. on a Friday, like being very clear about like, you cannot expect me to be here at all times. And it's something that requires like training
Yes.
sometimes. Like there are different time zones people don't always realize right away. But the number one thing is, I think, making sure you're clear about your boundaries so you can give yourself the time you need to kind of like rest and shut down, turn your brain off from work, has always been number one for me, at least.
100%. Leah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Roxanne said about setting boundaries. Also for me personally, like knowing that you can take breaks when you need to, like, and you can't you can't take care of others if you can't take care of yourself first is something that like I like yeah, it's definitely something that like I've had to learn the hard way. But knowing that like especially for me right now, like my team has my back and like if I need to like step away from any sort of situation, like they will be there to like help and like pick up the slack, which I'm always very, very grateful for.
Yeah. Annie.
Yeah, the mental health question as a community manager is so difficult because it's also like, yes, you absolutely have to understand that we're not on 24/7 duty. We're not maybe sometimes like on weekends. We have to have very firm boundaries of like these times when we are definitely going to be shutting off. It's also like this idea that as community managers, being on the front lines, being the
Mm.
ones talking to the community and being the first ones to get the toxic comments and sometimes understanding that like what we're saying is not making everyone happy. It's like that kind of mental gymnastics that we're always playing and understanding that like it does absolutely have to do with stepping off, like even if that means you set alarms on your phone, if that means with certain assets that go out that okay, you are not going to look at the comments on this specific blog because that it's not meant to be like maybe a two-way engagement piece. It's meant to be more of a like an announcement post, like just understanding where you're getting feedback, where the communication lines are open and when it's not. I think that's
Yeah.
probably the biggest thing for my mental health at least.
And Emily.
Yeah, I think the mental health question is so tied to community. And one of the things that I've had to like in the years that I've been on community do to kind of, you know, help myself with that is to really be patient with myself and
Mm.
to practice a lot of like knowing your own emotions and knowing that like recognizing the signs within yourself that things aren't okay. Like it takes
Yeah.
a lot of emotional intelligence to like recognize when you're getting to a point where you need to step back, but also not ignoring those warning signals and practicing patience with yourself and saying like if if I can't do this right now, if I'm not able to take this kind of like exposure or this
Yeah.
criticism or this like I guess just about anything, like it's okay to also step back and like there's no shame involved with that. You're not doing a bad job, like you're not disappointing or letting down your community to say like I'm not in a good space right now and I need to take a step back.
Yeah. As I will look into this webcam, Do not set yourself on fire to keep others warm because you will burn out. So please take that to heart. And this is something interesting talking about community, mental health, toxicity, because our next question is how does one handle toxicity within a gaming community? And let's go to Emily.
Whew. I think there's a variety of different ways, and like I'm excited that I get to hear everybody else talk about this too. I think recognizing that like people are really passionate about things is good because it tells you like where people's heads are at, but also that doesn't excuse bad behavior. Like that doesn't excuse mistreating people. And like even though you want to do right by your community, there are points of no return with somebody who is not acting right, who you've had to stop multiple times and tell them like, hey, this isn't cool, you're not creating a safe space. Like I think they're recognizing like when a community member or like a community function has gotten to a point where it's just not positive, and putting a firm stop to that is one way that you as an individual community manager can help facilitate a more positive environment.
Yeah. Annie.
Toxicity in gaming. Yeah. I
That
think the first thing is like it's important to definitely have the backing of your team because you're the one defining the community, right? And I think the most important thing you can do is to set the very specific rules of what's accepted and what's not accepted. That might sound like, well, it's common sense. Why don't you just go by that? Like, no, literally have it written down, have a code of conduct so that you can actually always refer to it, right? And that's something that will back you up when you do have to handle moments like that. Um, and I think as community managers, we have this instinct of wanting to welcome anyone and everyone into the space because our idea is that we want to be a good like space for everybody. But sometimes, like Emily said, someone does cross boundaries and that's not cool. Like you also have to be very, very firm in that. And I think sometimes some community managers might have some trouble with that. Some I know I do. And sometimes I need to be reminded, like if someone's being that toxic, be the banhammer. Sometimes the battle is just not worth it. It's not going to go anywhere. So you just have to wave that hammer sometimes.
waving the hammer. Leah.
Yeah, definitely agree with a lot of what Annie and Emily have said. Definitely standing by our code of conduct, and like even at a broader level, like the community, like at the company level, like I'm very fortunate to have worked places that like the company as a whole has been like very vocal about toxicity, especially against underrepresented communities. I would also say that like having a group of people, a team that will stand behind an action on toxic behavior. Like I'm very, very fortunate, like, and so grateful to like our forum moderators that like are in the trenches with us and who help us action on that kind of toxic behavior every single day. And then at the same time, like working towards ways that can lessen toxic behavior and be more welcoming towards underrepresented communities, definitely.
Very cool. Roxanne.
Yeah, I think everyone did a really good job of how to handle toxicity. Like definitely squash it when it gets to that point. When it gets to that point where someone's just repeatedly being toxic and no longer serving community, like it won't get better. The best thing to do is remove it. And yeah, I think it was Emily who said you need to be able to distinguish different types of toxicity. Like, is someone
Mm.
really passionate and upset? Is someone purely toxic and wanting to do damage?
Mm.
There's always so
Mm.
many things that go into each point. So having that code of conduct and everything, like Leia said, is like very important to have something to kind of have a baseline to compare to and
Mhm.
kind of know, be consistent in your moderation, do it in that way. And then two, it was how to handle toxicity in the gaming community. I actually, the first time I looked at this question, I thought like, how do I handle toxicity personally? And just another like side note about that, I think is the more you deal with it, the more you learn to like, how to experience it, how to remove yourself, and always remember when you're dealing with toxicity, even though it may feel directed at you, be targeted about you, know that it is not about you, no matter how aggressive someone is, how
Mm.
directed it might seem. But that's just something to always keep in mind and can be hard when you're in there trying to handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting thing that you mentioned earlier, Roxanne, also dealing with mental health, burnout, maybe toxicity and being on the front lines, but what is it like balancing your personal brand when you are also running a company's brand or accounts? And Roxanne.
Okay. I have like three rules I always kind of follow
We love
when
this.
I like lists.
Me
When you're
too.
someone working kind of at a company in a visible position, especially where you have public social media, I'd say your safety always comes first. Set those boundaries like we talked about earlier. And third, though, always expect those boundaries to be broken. um like, as unfortunate as it is, like acting as kind of a public figure in a visible position always comes with some amount of risk. So I feel like the safest and most accurate assumption is to assume that anything you do or say online, even if it's your personal brand, will get tied back to your job. Complete, even if it's completely harmless. Like, yes, you still have the right to do, say, express yourself however you like. But for example, I had someone the other day. We had a bad moment where we had to delay a game. It felt bad. And people were in there. Suddenly, they had uncovered my personal hobbies and were like, "You're terrible at your job. Go back to doing this hobby," which is fine, not particularly damaging, but it was super weird and irrelevant. um,
Yeah.
so it's very important to set those boundaries. How you use your social media, especially when it's public. Just be aware with how you're interacting with players on it. And like I said, don't censor yourself. You can always be like, these are my opinions. Don't feel the need to hide yourself or anything, but just be aware that there will always be that connection brought back into your job. It's just something that I've always experienced, never been able to avoid.
Yeah.
And a lot of your community will back you up and be friendly, especially if they know you in that way and be like, this is weird. But that's something that, I always have in my mind.
Yeah. Leah.
Yeah, I think in my role it's a little bit different because although I am working like closely with communities, I'm fortunate that I maintain a level of anonymity with my work.
Hmm.
Um, but for me, because I do still have public social media, learning how to distinguish my personal voice from kind of like the brand voice is
Yeah.
something that like very early on helped me keep those two lives like very separate. Like when you see something coming from a Twitter account or something like that we may have written, it doesn't look at all like what I write on a personal social media, and so that has really helped me as I navigate through that.
Yeah. Annie.
Um, my rule is to participate in excitement, but to turn away from negativity on my personal brand, of course. Like, of course, on public social media, some of the members of the community will find you, and if they're legitimately excited, if they just want to share with what you're sharing, yeah, I love that. I love the hype. But if it's purely a negative comment, someone wants to bait me, or it's a question that I can kind of convert over to like the official channels,
Mhm.
I don't engage there. Yeah, the other thing is like being authentic, I guess, with yourself as well is very important, because when people do kind of find your personal brand and want to engage with you, it's also they want to engage with you. But just making sure that, yeah, there is that balance. It is cheesy to say to be authentic, but it's just understanding, like, you just want to be friendly as well, right? Because like you said, everything does come back to the brand. So you want to be there for the community, but in a way that doesn't put yourself at risk.
Yeah. Emily.
I love what Annie said about authenticity. That is like 110%. Like, I totally share that thing of just like sometimes you just want to use your own social media and to be yourself, and like
Yeah.
you're allowed to do that, and not everything has to be like you are always on. I also think like avoiding like parasocial relationships with like any community members, like letting them know that like, hey, this is my social media. I'm just a person. Like, yes, this is my role. Like, but like just kind of establishing a boundary with people who are part of your community as like, hey, this is my day job. And then if I want to hang out, if I like want to be like friends, I will let you know. Like, But as far as like my role as your community like manager versus my role as a human being, like those are two different things. And that's totally okay. It doesn't mean that I don't care about you as a community manager, but I also have my own stuff as my own kind of person. So just watching those relationships closely and just being mindful of that.
Yes, the different hats and the different roles in which we've talked about, which hat is on at the moment and being clear about that.
Mhm.
So you do have that separation. This is a really, I think, very important for many of those who may be in the audience and are like, I like community. I am interested in that. What advice can you give to someone who is looking to go into community management? Emily.
Oh, honestly, like get involved in communities that you love. Like one of the like great pathways for community managers is like moderating and being just really involved with the community. Like being like somebody who takes opportunities to work closer with communities that you're passionate about. And I mean that also comes with like if you want to pursue education, if you don't, just start getting involved and looking at internships and looking at different opportunities. The worst that anybody can say is no.
Yes. No, I say yes to your no, which is true. Annie.
Um, I think my number one advice would be to reach out for one-on-ones with folks in the industry who are open, of course, and not maybe not even just those in marketing or community management, because sorry, someone mentioned here that community managers talk to so many different people in a company that you can speak to anyone about their job and understand how they're tied to community and you know go in ready to learn, don't have an ego and thinking you can't learn something. You can always learn something from anyone, even if it's someone who's been in a role for 10 years, even if it's just from someone starting out. I've learned something from every single person at different career paths and how it tied back to community, how they work with marketing, what's useful for them. Coming ready with questions so that you're carrying the conversation and ready to learn from them. And also to take advantage of all of the resources that are out there. There are a lot of resources now, given that community management is becoming a more and more popular role within a lot of games, and not even just in games and other industries, right? Look at marketing campaigns that you really like, break it down yourself. Why do you think the decisions have been made? It's a really good practice. And then maybe coming with that into your one on ones could be a really good exercise to learn more about community management and marketing.
Shout out, but Victoria Tran, who was on this panel last year, did a GDC talk on communities and kindness that is on the GDC Vault. If you Google communities and kindness, highly recommend. Good resource for learning. And she's now at Innersloth for Among Us. So definitely, there's resources out there as community becomes a, topic of academia and study that are slowly getting more normalized in the mainstream. Leah.
Yeah, definitely agreeing with what Emily said. Start small and get involved. Um, I had this thought when I first started that like, oh, you have to like work with like really large and really established communities to kind of get into this space, and like that's absolutely not true. As long as you are like having like these meaningful and impactful community interactions and like in a field that you're passionate about, you will like eventually like grow those skills and become more confident in your community manager like role, and that will give you the baseline to like grow into like working with gaming communities and larger communities and all that good stuff.
And Roxanne.
Yeah, I think everybody covered it really well. Just get involved. And what Leia said, there are so many spaces, especially now with how popular games are and how popular, being in a pandemic for the last year, everyone's online. So there's so many opportunities. Forums, Discord, streamer spaces. Something that's really funny, maybe not the most traditional path, but I know quite a few people that made their way into community management, starting as like guild leaders and different like online MMOs. Like at least two people, like more than one. So even for them being able to manage like a guild of a bunch of players and gamers and work out issues there, they had put it on their resume, and it was, a great way to gain experience. Again, maybe not the most traditional, but really just anything you can do to get your hands on. There's so many ways to learn.
Exactly. This is a really, I think, fun one. To talk about some happy memories. But what is your favorite part of being a community manager, Roxanne?
I just love getting to work with people who are like as passionate and into games as I am. Like I've been a gamer since I was like a little kid, and it was always my favorite thing. So being able to work with a team of devs, and work with the people who love the things they're creating, and like be that intermediary to make things better for everyone, it's just like a really awesome feeling. I always love that.
Love that. Leah?
Yeah, for me, I would say reveal days for us.
Ooh, yeah.
Um, it's like the player's Christmas, and like watching watching a community get so excited about things that like I've seen people at the studio work so passionately on, and like getting their first look at it and like watching their excitement just grow and grow. Like it gets me really excited, and it gets everyone else in the studio super excited, and it's just like the best day.
No, I think when you think about trailers, sometimes the goosebumps, yeah. I get that. Annie?
I was gonna say the same thing. Like participating in the hype. I
Yeah.
think gamers hype. It's like the most pure form, unfiltered gaming happiness. Like we've all seen. I bet everyone here has seen like some reaction videos of certain titles getting released, and like people are crying. Like I'm sorry, but that is my favorite part. Yeah, reveal days, game release days. Like I'm so excited for our game release day. I'm gonna be right there experiencing it with everyone alongside it, and it's just, yeah, that pure form of happiness. Like what beats that?
Yeah. Emily?
I love that Annie said that the game reveals that like you see people crying because I am that person. I'm that person who just like ugly sobs at like certain titles where I'm just like, oh, I'm so happy. But like I think my favorite thing honestly is talking to community members and hearing what like what the it's meant to them to be part of like a community or to like experience the game. Like on Discord, there have been times where you hear somebody say, like, I met like my life partner on Discord, like through community, or I met like a group of friends that like we would have never gotten a chance to like talk together. We're across time zones and like all this stuff. And you hear like how it's impacted them to be like part of this community or make their own. Like it's for all the like the toxic things or somebody breaking boundaries and all the really serious things that you have to deal with on a daily basis, like hearing people share those stories is like the one thing that can make my day no matter what happened. Like it's just great.
No, I think that's really important, Emily, to bring up because we're talking about, toxicity and boundaries and really hard situations. But I think that it's also important, right, to bring up the extreme positives and joy that community managers get to experience, right, within their jobs, like people getting married, like huge life stones that would not have happened without this thing that you're a part of. It's a conduit for community. You are a conduit for community, which is really cool. So very, I just think that's so lovely. This is a really interesting one going back again to talking about people who on the audience who are like, I might be interested in that. What is something you wish you knew at the beginning of your career that you know now? Emily.
Um there is no designated path for success.
Yes.
There is no formula for like what your career is supposed to look like, how old you're supposed to be when you get this kind of job, like what are you supposed to know how to do versus know like that you've never touched. Like there is no established path and you are exactly where you need to be at all times because you're a different professional from anybody else. And your path forward and your path for success is going to look different than your like coworkers or your close friends or anybody else in the industry, and that's okay. Like you are not falling behind. You are exactly where you need to be.
Annie.
Had the same answer, just in like different words. And it's so funny because Emily and I, we both came from AMD and we're at there at the same time. Yeah, I was gonna say there is no rush. It's something that I've definitely struggled with, and I think everyone will struggle with, especially as they start their careers. That you feel like you are working to get to a very specific place, a very specific job title, a very specific company. But there's absolutely no rush. Just focus on your craft and excel in what you're doing. Even if that means if your job is just writing social copy, be the very best social copywriter ever and don't compare yourself to anyone else. Your only competition is yourself. And that's, I know everyone's going to be repeating that kind of lesson for everyone, and it's going to be hard to really take it in, but really try to take it in.
I said it in chat, but I was told early by a mentor, comparison is the thief of your joy. Like you just
Oh
talked
my God,
about.
it's so true. It's so true.
Right? And it's about being individualistic in how
Yep.
you go through your career. Leah.
Yeah, I would say that you don't have to be an extrovert to work with communities, and there is like no right way to like work with a community. Like when I first started, I had this idea that like, oh, people who work with communities, they must be like these super outgoing, super extroverted people. But as I started working more and more with communities, like that's really not the case. Like there are different ways to engage with the community, even if you aren't an extrovert. And like, like the smaller one-to-one, more intimate interactions have just as much validity as like the larger, like more like outgoing interactions, I would say.
Really important to know. Roxanne.
I like those were so wholesome, and I feel like my follow up is not as wholesome, but no, I'm like, oh man. So this is something that cognitively everyone does know, but really realizing it and taking it in. When you're a community manager, you're going to be riding like so many highs and so many lows alongside so many other people. And at the end of the day, it's really important to kind of like not internalize it and remember like it's just video games. And I say that as someone who video games have been something I
Yeah.
was passionate about my whole life. I love them. They bring people so much joy. They are important. But at the end of the day, when all the servers are burning and you're being yelled at and everything is going wrong, you step down. It's so hard to turn off your computer. I'm sure we've all been there. It's so hard to turn off your computer and you feel like you're letting everyone down because you can't fix anything. And it's like,
We're all
it's
laughing because
just
it's
video
true.
games.
It's
Like,
true.
no one's gonna die. Like, it's gonna be okay. Like it'll get figured out and people will be upset, but like it will be okay. And that's something that when you're in the thick of it is so hard to remember. But it's just video games.
I love that. It's very sweet and a nice reminder of reality. So we've actually entered our audience questions portion. So we have our first one that's actually a directed question for an individual, but Emily mentioned parasocial relationships. This is very important. What does that actually mean? And how does that impact community work?
Uh, so there's a lot of good documentation around parasocial relationship that like I would be happy to drop in chat too after the fact, because I will give you like a quick summary, but I probably won't have the best answer for you. But like a parasocial relationship is kind of when you watch your favorite streamer and they're talking about their life or they're talking about something that's going on for them, and you feel connected to them in that moment of like, I am watching you as a viewer, you are telling me this information, but you have to know that like that is, while a great moment of like connecting with another person, you don't know that person intimately. Like I could say like I've heard this great story from a community member about how they like Discord brought their like whole friend group together, but I don't personally know that friend group. I personally don't know this person, so I can't make assumptions about their life, and I don't want to like create a relationship there knowing that information that isn't actually there. So how does that impact community building is just you never know what somebody's going through. You never know the circumstances of somebody's like somebody's life or something that they've brought to the table. So practice both respecting your own boundaries, but respecting that other person's boundaries too. And don't like try to understand that on like a deep intimate level. You got to meet them where they are and just be kind to people when you can, but also know when to step back and disconnect and say like at the end of the day, I really hope that things go really well for you. I'm going to do everything that I can as a community manager to help you, but I can't solve all of your problems, and I can do what I can do as an individual to help you, but that may not make everything better, and that's okay. Like, you gotta recognize what you can do as a community manager and what you can't.
Does anyone have anything to add?
That was that was a great way to put it. I don't think I could put it any better, Emily. So I'm not going to.
I completely agree. And there's also something like Emily said, there's so many resources on it, and it's definitely something that is more new and modern, right? With the rise of the internet
Mhm.
and influencers, even as a profession and how that relates to people's daily lives. So definitely a good question to ask and something to be mindful of. This next question I think is super important, but how does a community manager work with developers? How can a developer best help our community managers in the work they do? I also know there's a hot tea about is community manager a game dev, da, 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 but I would love to hear from anyone here. Kind of like I said, the audience questions are more jump in style.
Yeah, I've done a lot of this, and I think I can kind of speak to it because I've had so many different backgrounds and worked with so many different kind of dev teams. I think the short answer, the number one way, like the best way to work with a dev team back and forth, is just to always have open communications, always open door, always be ready to just discuss anything or bring information back and forth and share it and like not be precious about it. But there's a lot of different ways that CMs can work with developers. It kind of depends on the game, on the studio. I've been in situations where I've worked really close with the dev team, actually making game decisions based on feedback, helping them, helping guide them, helping change certain decisions based on feedback, all that sort of stuff. And at which case, when I was doing that, I certainly felt like part of the dev team. Um, where I'm working now, we're a third party publisher, so I don't work directly with the dev team anymore. We do share feedback back and forth a little bit, but it's a separate company. I work more closely with our publishing team and infrastructure and stuff, so that's kind of a different way that we communicate and share things while knowing like, okay, some of the feedback that it's very unique. The game we're prepping right now has already been
Yeah.
out in different parts of the world for a few years. So sometimes gathering that feedback, will
Mhm,
not
mhm.
have as much of an impact. But in this case, it's like, okay, what can we do? What can we change on our side, whether it's localization, whatever, to make the community happy? So there's different levels of like granularity. Just it really depends on the team, and I know how that sounds, but there's so many examples of that, like how we talked about earlier. Like a community manager's role is like different anywhere you'll go.
Yep.
So it really just depends on the project. But no matter what, always having open paths for communication with your dev team or your publishing team or your producer, especially, is just key to making sure everyone gets what they need to do the best job they can do.
Yeah, to add to that, I think it may also feel different if you are on the community team for the developer, like the studio, or are you a community team for a publisher? So, Roxanne, I'm sure like that's the kind of experience that you were speaking from. And just to add to the communication element of it, it's just like super important to make sure that it's two-way communication, right? And you're not doing anything in a bubble, both ways. So I like Emily said before, the community team talks to pretty much everyone in the company and just making sure that, a simple thing like syncing up with everyone on your launch plan and making sure this is what we're going to say. Are there any concerns? Does this impact anything that the dev teams are planning to do in the future? Should we hold some piece of information back because it's something we're going to have to come back to? And making sure that everyone is a stakeholder in everything that the community is doing and planning to say. That's not necessarily to say that the devs are like micromanaging the community team or anything like that. It's just purely letting them be in the know, and
Mhm.
that goes both ways. Just the community sitting in on maybe some of the dev teams, like the art teams meeting sometimes, or their scrums, or inviting them to the community teams meeting sometimes, and just making sure that everything that you plan, everyone's just aware.
Yeah. Cross-disciplinary, y'all. Very cross-disciplinary. So that was our last question. So before we leave, I would love if each of you could shout out either your personal socials where people can find you on the interwebs or anything else you would like to say. And let's start with Roxanne.
Me again. um, my handle is super awkward, so I'm gonna spell it. I'm Roxley on the internet, Roxxlyy. Oh no, now I have to like panic and think of something to say. These people on the I know, I'm so like on the spot. Everyone on this panel, they've been great to be on with. There's like so
Aw.
many different perspectives, and I haven't really spoken with some of these folks before today. So definitely there's so much valuable information here and perspectives that like I hadn't even necessarily been thinking of when I was prepping to answer some of these questions. So super valuable, especially if anyone's like watching this and wants to get into community. Like I feel like these are some of the best. So
Yeah, Leah.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at xroyalty. It's XROYALTEA instead of like TY. Um, yeah, I've been like super fortunate to like be able to talk about community with these lovely folks, especially coming from someone who's not a community manager. But yeah.
Needed perspective. Very wide spectrum. Thank you, Leah. I know it actually like very cool to see so many different perspectives on the same discipline. Annie.
You can find me on Twitter at Annie of Lee. And just my own closing thoughts. Like, yes, thank you, everyone. Like, it's been an honor to be on this panel with all of you. And for everyone watching, don't let, the kind of things that we spoke around the negative side be like a turn off. When there are the high moments, they are truly, truly joyous. It is very exciting to be in community. And I know that there's a lot of discourse around what community management is and kind of it being looked at like an entry level job before you move on to something else. It's not, things are changing in community. Things are definitely being like a lot of people are paving the way for community management to be a very exciting and serious role. So if that's a path that you're thinking about, the future is very bright in community management.
And Emily.
Yes, you can find me on Twitter on as Citronites. It's a somewhat it's not easy to spell, so I'm not going to try. Um, but again, like echoing everybody, like everybody's perspective here is so valuable, and I think like getting to know different CMs and different marketing people and different social people across like tech and gaming and it's different everywhere you go, but I think the uniting factor between all of us is that we really care about the people who care about the things that we're working on. And like working in community is, I think Annie put it best when it's just like it can be so joyous. Like it can like you can do like things that you never thought you would be able to do. Like I worked on E3 one year and I had remembered being like a kid and watching E3 and being so excited and like loving it. And then I got to sit down and have this moment of like, I am working on something that 14-year-old Emily would have never
Yeah.
believed possible. Like, what something I'm doing something that as a kid would have absolutely blown my mind. And it still does. And you just don't get used to that kind of stuff.
No, we love that. Well, I just want to give a huge thank you for spending time with us today from myself and our audience and everyone here at Area of Effect. So thank you to our amazing panelists. Reminder that we are still taking donations to our cause Gamers Outreach on Tiltify, where you can register for the chance to win some awesome, awesome prizes today. Be sure to check out the information below our stream, hit command, donate, or check out our Discord to find out more about how you can get involved. So, a quick shout out to our partners. We are partnered with Twitch Student. Twitch Student offers the means to grow an even larger audience, represent your university on Twitch, and gain skills and experience valuable to a future in gaming. Geek Therapeutics, the leader and gold standard in teaching professionals, parents, students, and others about geek therapy. Thank you so much, and we'll be back after a short commercial break.